Welcome back to Illinois Law, brought to you by the Illinois State Bar Association. Just before we took our break, we were talking about RTI, response to intervention, and we were discussing sort of how the triangle looks that is RTI. Let's look on, how does this look in a classroom?
Well, in a classroom, John identified that it's really a general education initiative, and it really stems from the gathering of information related to each child in the classroom that resulted from the No Child Left Behind initiative, where we're beginning to gather more information about each child from testing, and also the efforts to focus instruction and interventions on scientifically based, research-driven models. And so in the classroom, we look at interventions on areas of need that have been identified by or for each child based upon their success and their areas of deficiency as measured against the curriculum they're being presented with, and or how they're doing on tests. And so those interventions would be done as a component of the general curriculum and how it's delivered, and would try to fill those gaps for students based upon their unique areas of need in the classroom.
And when you see this, and you see the data gathering, what should the parent be looking for?
Well, I would say that they ought to be very interested in this, and they ought to be in very close contact with the school to see that the child is actually making progress. You know, if that chart, that graph that we put in regarding those data points, where we're collecting assessment data about how the child's progressing, if we're not seeing the kind of increase that we should, then the question the parent ought to be asking is, when are we going to try the next step? What's going to be the next intervention?
And what would be a likely next step?
Well, if a child is at Tier 1, which is where most of the general population is, the next step would be to move up perhaps to either Tier 2 or Tier 3, depending on how severe the problem is. It doesn't necessarily follow that a child has to go from Tier 1 to Tier 2 to Tier 3. If it's a severe problem, the intervention might be to take the child all the way up to Tier 3, where there is more intense instruction to get that child from struggling back into the normal flow of the classroom.
And that's an interesting point, because a parent might wonder, how much does my child have to stay here, maybe not succeeding, before he can move on and get more help?
Yeah. And I think at that point it's important to maintain, for the parent, to maintain the communication with the school personnel so that the parent understands what's going on with their child.
And then in this kind of situation, is the child still remaining in the regular classroom?
In most circumstances, they would be remaining in the regular classroom. They would be exposed to the general curriculum or a regular education curriculum with supports and a variety of interventions being employed. It is not considered special education under the law.
So just basically extra help.
Right. And that could occur in the classroom, or it could occur in some circumstances outside the classroom as well.
But taking them outside the classroom for extra help is not the same as special education.
That is correct.
So it's just giving them a boost.
That's right.
And when you talk about the data gathering, what kinds of data are you gathering, really? Is this the same data that's being gathered on other children? Are they getting specialized tests? What are you looking at?
Really, all children are getting tested as part of RTI. And what happens then is, if a child moves from Tier 1 to one of the higher tiers, they're going to be tested more. So in Tier 2, they'll be tested more than Tier 1. In Tier 3, they'll be tested more than Tier 2. And what that is designed to do is to identify the problem and make sure, monitor that progress and make sure that progress is being made with the intervention.
And when you talk about testing, I think this is important for parents to know. You're not talking about sitting down and taking a day of testing the way they do for a special achievement test, are you?
That could be part of it, but what I think the good point that you're making is, it could be something as simple. Let's say that the kindergarten or first grade teacher was concerned about reading, and so they may ask a child to decode some words, to be able to pronounce those words and look at their phonemic awareness. how they able to, are they able to pronounce the word properly? And so if they're able to do that, this may only take a couple minutes, and as long as they're able to do that, then they could use that very simple assessment to determine. But schools are also using, for example, they'll maybe quarterly tests that are put together by the district. And so it really is, again, a kind of a continuum of assessments from the very simple classroom types of things to more formalized types of assessments as well.
But I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're monitoring progress all along the way.
That is.
So there are no surprises.
That's
right.
correct. That
And
is correct.
how does this relate then to the general curriculum? Is this testing done specialized to each child, or is this across the curriculum?
Typically, it's my understanding that you might, as a parent, hear the term curriculum-based assessment, meaning that the assessments that are being used or as part of monitoring progress in the RTI model would be looked at based upon what the general curriculum is being provided to the child. It isn't a test that's designed separate and apart of what's going on a day-to-day basis in the classroom.
So it's more, where is your child today or Thursday or whenever you're testing relative to where he should be in the third grade,
Correct.
if he's in the third grade.
And then once a problem is identified, then there's progress monitoring, which can be those drills like John was talking about, that determines whether progress is being made with the intervention.
And can this intervention that we're looking at be specific to certain areas of the curriculum, or would it be across the curriculum, or does it depend on the child?
It's supposed to be for all children in all subjects, is the way that the language in the statute is.
So that you're looking at everybody.
That is
It's
correct.
not being singled out.
That's right.
But a child might have a problem with reading and not with math. And in that case, the RTI would only involve reading and not math.
So they could be at level 3 for everything but one area, and then maybe level 2 or 1 in just math, for instance, if that's where they have a problem.
Absolutely.
And different children obviously would be at different places. Can they be in different places over time? So they could be changing over time.
They could be. It's a very fluid model, and the whole idea is to look at the individual needs, whether the interventions are working, and then ultimately, if the interventions don't appear to be working and the child isn't performing in a manner that allows the child to be successful in the general curriculum, there may be a need to look to see whether or not the child is in fact in need of special education or related services. And there we get to the whole idea of whether or not there should be an evaluation.
That's exactly where we're going to talk about, what we're going to talk about in our next segment. So stay tuned. We'll be right back and talk a little bit more about what happens next.